hit record. There's a few people that couldn't make it, so if everyone's okay with that. Cool, welcome everyone. So really excited today to get together and talk about the power of internal tools. Sorry, people are just kind of popping in. I just need to approve them. Cool. Yeah, so we wanted to kind of get a group together and talk about the power of internal tools. And me and I were kind of talking, and we realized that there's a whole community building products for our co-workers. And we really believe internal customers deserve, the same care and attention as what you might see in an external product or consumer products. So we're trying to build a community of internal product managers and developers and designers who are building, interested in, or just a little bit curious about how internal products can empower people in the business. So hoping to have a really good conversation with David today. If you've just joined, post a little bit of an introduction in the chat and change the grid layout so you get more people on there too.
Cool. So like Ryan mentioned, we're really excited to have David Weekley with us today. He, like he was mentioning at the beginning, is the CEO of MedQuarter and was also a former lead of internal products at Facebook and at Google. So we've got about 1 hour today, and we do have a bunch of questions. Ryan and I will kind of be moderating at the beginning, but if you have a question, there is a Q&A feature in Google Meets, and we're going to activate that, turn that on. Feel free to post your question there, and we'll save a good chunk of time at the end to allow people to ask David some live questions. So, David, one of the things that I thought was just really awesome and exciting about meeting you for the first time yesterday was just the great passion and excitement that you have about products in general, but specifically internal tools. And I kind of am hoping that you can just tell everyone where that excitement comes from and why you love internal products so much.
Yeah, so at Facebook, I was one of the first generalist PMs to come in and help run internal tools. Previously they had experimented with having a separate ladder that they had made because they were having trouble recruiting people to perform internal PMing work. They had created this basically separate ladder for internal PMs. And the conclusion was that it hadn't gone very well, right? And so this was part of an experiment. So can we take a generalist PM and have them work on internal PM tools and apply the same level of passion and rigor and craftsmanship for internal tools as they would for an external facing product at Facebook? And the answer was yes, and it's awesome, and it has really big impact. And so that was really, for me, I had built internal tools as part of running my first 2 companies, as just part of doing my job there involved helping build and oversee the building of internal tools. Bless you. But at Facebook, really getting tasked with that, I got to see how intimately connected we were with our customers, that our customers were our coworkers. And that was a really neat bond that we would go and put in a special little thing. We would go and put in an improvement, and literally while grabbing lunch, we would have people come up to us and say, thank you so much for putting that in there, right? And to be able to close the loop that quickly and intimately with your customer base to co-evolve the product with them was definitely pretty cool. And then getting to see kind of across my career in technology, the real outcomes of the mythical man mod, that if the internal tools are crappy and as a result, people are not able to get their work done really well. And so it's I guess we need to hire more people. Let's throw more people at the problem. And you see rapidly diminishing returns, potentially negative returns for doing that in terms of helping projects ship on time. The right answer to that is to focus on systems and processes that let your existing team be more effective. And a great way of doing that is empowering your employees with awesome tools to get their job done. Because it turns out that when people have access to great tools, they're not only able to get more done, they enjoy doing it more, right? Because it turns out that most people don't want to spend time wrangling crappy tools or with administrivia. They want to be great at their jobs, right? So this is sort of one of these weird open secrets of work, is that when you're good at your job and you're able to do your job and stuff isn't in your way, that's a great feeling. And it's a great feeling for the company and the shareholders too, because you're able to drive tremendous impact in that. And our role as internal PMs is to help empower everybody at our org with that sensation of being able to be great at their jobs, able to deploy themselves effectively to do their work, and then as a result, to do much better work. And so you sort of see the opposite of the mythical man month, where when you give a team a way to operate much more effectively, they not only can get things done faster, they can get classes of things done that they just couldn't get done before. And so it ends up becoming not just a cost savings and a time to market improvement, but it ends up becoming a strategic advantage for that company to be able to build, launch, and maintain products and solutions that their competitors can't, because their competitors aren't giving their employees that kind of tooling. Even beyond that, people want to keep working for a company that's got great internal tools. Something that made us very proud on the internal tools team at Facebook was that when we talked to people who had left Facebook, what do you miss most about Facebook? Very common on the list of top things that they missed about working at Facebook was using the tasks tool. And the task tool was one of the tools that we had made. It's kind of the operating system of Facebook as a company. Literally everything that gets done at Facebook gets done because it's a task in the tasks tool. So a task gets created when you order a hamburger on the touchscreen display. A task gets created when somebody signs in at the front desk looking for a visitor. A task gets created when there's a bug in the Android app that needs fixing. So like you get it. Everything is a task, and we worked really hard to make the task tool performant, to make it beautiful, to make it easy to use, to make it flexible and able to handle all these different kinds of workflows. And the fact that it became so used and so beloved that you didn't even realize how great it was until you're all of a sudden you've decided to move on from Facebook to another job. Like, oh God, they don't have tasks here. The similar thing for internal search. Like we just put a lot of, love into that product. Like literally every week we would roll up what are the top things being searched for. We'd review what are our results for these top bits. Do we have satisfying results here, and what can we do about that? So we noticed, for instance, that a lot of employees, surprise, surprise, were searching for shuttle times. And their expectation when searching for shuttle times was they would find some page on the wiki or on HR that had a list of the different shuttle times. So we decided to go above and beyond on this because we're an internal tool. We can pull from all these different other internal sources, and we know which employee is logged in. So we know what shuttle they took in the morning. We know what shuttles they've taken back home in the evening. And so we know that, okay, you're getting off at whatever, 16th and Mission, right? So, and we know what time it currently is, obviously. And so the reason why people would look for it would be look, when is the next shuttle departing that will get me home? And then we built a special module just to do that. So if you search for shuttle or shuttle times, you get this like special module that shows up and says, hi, Rebecca, your next shuttle going home to 16th and Mission departs in 17 minutes, right? And then, and here are the next time, the departure times after that, because it turns out that was the information they were searching for. And it's blew people's minds, right? Because like, this was like the coolest thing ever. And they weren't expecting to get such a personalized an immediate direct answer. They were expecting to get linked to a page that had a PDF that had the shuttle schedule they could go and look at, right? So it's just that desire to make for a wonderful experience for the end users, to pour the same kind of craftsmanship in, really delighted people. And people could also give us very direct feedback. We screwed things up as well, right? And people knew where to find us, right? When you have a consumer product, there's no phone number for Gmail, right? You can't like pick up the phone and be like, I'm really annoyed that you did this in Gmail. Please fix this immediately, right? So we're used to using a lot of these tools from third parties, like using Slack, like using GitHub, that are operated by other companies. And like maybe there's a way to put in a support ticket, but it's not really immediate. But with internal tools, it's like, Fred, why did you check this in? You broke my workflow, right? So like you get this very immediate and visceral surface area contact for bug reporting. And then finally, because you're also an employee at that company, you're dog fooding, And so you feel the pain yourself because you need to use these tools yourself to go and get your job done. And there's a classic thing. So I'm also an investor in startups, by the way. I love startups. This is my third startup here. I've invested in 70 startups. Big fan of startups. And one of the things that you see in startup world is that startups that solve their own need, where the founder has experienced the problem, they're disproportionately more likely to succeed. Right. And so that's something that you look for.
Kind of scratching your own itch kind of thing.
Yeah, you're scratching your own itch, right? So why do you care about this problem? Is it just like you're reading a business review journal and it mentioned that some people have this problem and you thought maybe I could make some money by solving this problem for these people? Like, maybe you'll be a success in that, but like the odds are pretty low. But if you have a personal story about like, why do you care? Why is this a big deal for you? Have you run into this problem? Then those companies, literally, they're more than 4 times more likely to succeed than if you're solving to somebody else's problem. And good news, if you're building an internal tool, you're probably building it for yourself. And so that actually kind of fun tip means you're disproportionately more likely to succeed in building a product that works pretty well because you're forcibly dog fooding it yourself. So the fact that you're an internal PM or thinking about being an internal PM, I don't know the details for everybody on this call, but it means that you may end up being some of the most effective PMs in industry because kind of by definition, you're dog fooding your own product, which means you're going to want to make it great.
So one of the things that's really interesting about being an internal PM, kind of like what you mentioned, is just the idea that you could be the user also. And one of the challenges that I know that a lot of people have is, well, how do we market this tool internally? Like, what are the strategies that we can use? It's different than marketing an external product. Maybe can you walk us through what you did for some task tool features that launched and just general thoughts on that?
Sure. So it's always an interesting thing because similar to, I don't know if any of you have had background in enterprise software, but there's an interesting dynamic in enterprise software where the buyer is often different than the user. And so a lot of classic enterprise software sucks because it has all of the things that the buyer is looking for and can tick those boxes. And the sales guy went golfing with the CIO. So the CIO decided to buy the thing. And the software is just awful because that wasn't something they needed. They didn't need to make great software because the users were different. So internal tools, people's expectations, their bar is very, very low. I bet the UI is going to be awful, because I have to use this to get my job done, right? So let me go and issue a PO with the awful PO issuance tool. Let me, onboard a vendor with the awful vendor onboarding tool. Like the expectation for the quality is very, very low. So I think some of just sending the signal to your users that I'm going to take you seriously. I care about whether or not you like this tool. I have shiny new features and I want to walk you through them, as if this was an onboarding onto a vendor offering, right? I think those things alone will immediately put you over the bar for where somebody's expectations are. So I think to a certain degree, the marketing of it is relatively easy. That just doing some of the basics that you get from blocking and tackling in consumer PM, if there's a new feature, you've got some sort of Chiron that shows up, like the dismissible, like feature tour, like, oh, by the way, this is new. You've got a change log that's available, so you've got some sort of internal blog. You can send out an email. You know who uses the tool and you know their email address, so you can email users of the tool like, hey, by the way, I noticed that sometime in the last 30 days, you used my vendor onboarding tool. We've got some cool new features. We want to know what you think about them. Hitting reply will actually reply just to me. Or by the way, I sit in building 16. Like, come by my desk and tell me what you think. Right? Those sort of things that expose that, oh, it's a real human being that's building this stuff, that's crafting this stuff. They sit near me. I can pick up the phone. I can see them in person. Well, not in 2020 maybe, but here's to hoping end of year 2021, they'll be able to come over and like tap you on the shoulder again. And just having that sort of basic blocking and tackling of the sort of communications channels for marketing to an existing user of a high quality consumer app, do those same things internally, you'll blow people's minds because people are not expecting that level of support. There are little things that we rolled out like CSAT surveys. So at Google, I built a new product org for the data center software team, 130 engineers responsible for all the software that manages all of Google's data centers, including all of the about 2,000 people who work in Google's data centers worldwide. And so we wrote the software for those folks. And the fact that we actually started getting on planes, going on site and listening, like, what do you like about the tool? What do you not like about the tool? What did we screw up? What's awesome and we shouldn't mess with, right? Nobody had ever done that before. In fact, most of the engineers working on tools that were being used by people working in the data center had never been to a data center. They didn't know what it looked like. They had never actually seen their product being used. And so one of the things that we did is, we worked with management to get budget to make sure that, and get schedule to make sure that the engineers could actually go into the field and see their products being used by the users who are using their products, right? But also B, that I managed to get some very special exemptions from up on high. I was one of about 12 people across all of Google who had permission to go into a Google data center with a video camera and film what was being done without getting tackled by security, right? This is all access pass. It was like kind of like the God badge. It was kind of cool. But the reason why we did it was to bring the data center back to the people who are writing the tools for the data center, right? So that when they were having a conversation about like, well, what does the RAM upgrade procedure look like? And people would talk about it with no intuitive understanding of what was actually being done. Because like, watch this video of a technician performing a RAM upgrade. Here's what's actually involved. I'm like, oh, I get it, right? And so that proved really useful. We built up this library of videos of actual tasks being performed by technicians with the software that were in the data center, right? So this is all part of answering the question, how do you market an internal tool? Part of the marketing is that you're taking the product management of the tool seriously. You're asking questions, you're out there visibly gauging people's satisfaction, you're actively taking measures to improve satisfaction with the tool, you're looking at key metrics for what's letting you know that the tool is working well for people, and you're communicating actively about new features, about feature plans, all of that, right? And just that's all, the process is the marketing to a certain degree, right? And so I think that's pretty cool. One of the other things that we did at Facebook, and I was kind of proud of this, is I was checking out the MDM, that was a mobile device management solution that Facebookers use internally, and I noticed that we actually had the power to go and push internal built apps to people's phones. And I was like, ooh, you know what we should do? We should make an internal employee app called Mobile Home that pushes to all employees' phones and lets them navigate all of the cool internal tools that they have directly from their phone, right? And so we built that out, we pushed it out, and then but this may have been more of a Facebookism, but Facebook's super into posters for whatever interesting cultural artifact reasons, like a proper printing press capable of producing high quality posters is like on campus and has been from the very early days, actually. And so there's a lot of famous sort of Facebook motivational posters that they would make. And so we worked with one of the designers in the design lab there, and we made this beautiful poster like Mobile Home coming soon to an employee device near you. And we put those around. It's like, ooh, interesting, right? Like, what's this thing? Am I gonna be happy about it? And so it provoked conversation, and then people were excited when we rolled it out. They gave us feedback. We continued iterating on it, and now it's like a staple of Facebook employee life. It's like one of the main apps that you use at Facebook is you use Mobile Home to go and navigate to things. And that was our team. That was my idea. And the fact that we went and pushed that out there, we're thoughtful about the release, had it well designed, we're talking to users, we're continually improving it, like that led to a lot of good feeling about the tool internally. They're taking me seriously.
It seems like it's kind of an interesting catch-22, because at one side, at Shopify, we don't really think about how we acquire much new customers in the vault. They're all around us, but at the same time, we need to actually market and actually tell people like, this is now possible. Which I always, there's always tensions in that too. Like your customers are so close to you, but you almost want them to be at a distance. You kind of want to understand what problems they have and not the solutions. Yeah. How do you think about when is the right time to make an internal tool? I often think about the first kind of tier of an internal tool for most people is probably a spreadsheet, or it's probably some sort of document, and then it evolves. How do you see the life cycle of going through that, in contrast to, say, a consumer product?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think you astutely note that spreadsheets often V1 of an internal tool. A bash script might be another, V1 of an internal tool. And then the script gets more complicated and oops, nobody actually checked it out. And so it's like sort of just copied engineering workstation to engineering workstation, right? And then I think what happens is the point at which you're observing that a flow is starting to critically depend on some piece of the puzzle here, and that the piece of the puzzle is starting to not serve its job well. So I think part of it is not over-engineering things and burning huge engineering resources on things that aren't going to move the needle for the company, right? And so there are some cases where a spreadsheet is the right tool for the job. And the fact that the spreadsheet is working really well means that you should probably not mess with the process, because there's opportunity cost in changing processes. And however well built the next version of the tool that you're trying to move people onto, if you're asking people to change their workflow, you're going to run into a bunch of interesting friction points, right? With adoption, and then you get awkward issues with some people are using the old system and some people are using the new system. So anytime you want to throw out an old system and build a new system, the new system needs to be like 10 times better, right? It needs to be such a jaw-dropping improvement over the old system that there's no real argument about, well, why did you throw out the old thing? It was working okay. So I think you need a lot of pragmatism there. I think it's also important to not have a not invented here kind of syndrome. This was super tough at Google. So Google has a mixture of really rigorous security stance on things, which is delightful to see. You can be, by the way, if you use Google products like Meet here, you can be confident they're well engineered from a security perspective. But the downside of that meant that there was this beautiful cornucopia of incredibly powerful tools built by entities other than Google. Wow, weird thought. And you basically couldn't use any of them. And so that was really tough. But it places outside of Google that are a little bit more sane with consideration of internal tool usage of external vendors. One of the natural questions should be build versus buy. So it's like the first question is, do I actually have a problem here, or am I just due to personal issues? I'm allergic to spreadsheets, right? And maybe a spreadsheet hurt you when you were a child or something, right? And then if it's not that, if whatever tool in its very rudimentary state is not serving its job well, like, okay, you come to the decision, we're going to need to do something better than this. And then I think it's build versus buy, right? So do we have the resources? Do we have the budget to go and build something here? Is there a minimum viable product that we can build that's meaningfully better than what we have here, but it's not trying to boil the ocean and be this, an incredibly comprehensive tool that's going to take like years to build and an enormous engineering team? I see a raised hand from Austin.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, I'm loving this conversation. Your enthusiasm for internal tools is like absolutely contagious, and I just love your perspective here, especially around the internal marketing. But I do want to, you sort of said at the top, you talked about the system and the processes. When I think about the tools that we use, they sometimes define the processes. And like a lot of times when I sort of think through the internal tools that I'm building, I see, okay, this process actually deserves to change. Or to take that even a step further, our organizational design is out of alignment with the objectives that we're trying to create. So I would love to hear your feedback around, like, what do you do when you get into like some really complicated change management plans around building new tools?
It's a great point, because not every problem in life or in a large organization can be defined as like functional programming. If there's a set of inputs and there's a black box that does the right things, and there's a set of outputs, and the goal is to make a great black box, right? And so I think taking that wider view and like, hey, sometimes the process that you want me to automate is a bad process. So like I could make a tool to do that, But I think that's a bad idea, guys, right? So I think being able to highlight that and being able to work cross-functionally on higher level feedback of things that need to change is an important part of a PM's role at a large company, and is different than the role that, say, a CEO of a garage startup needs to go and play, because there are stakeholders that you need to discover and you need to address and that you need to persuade, because you don't own the entirety of the decision, right? You can own the entirety of a decision around, we're going to build a tool X, but if it exists in a vacuum, and if it's part of this beautiful process that exists in your head for like, here's how I think the procurement organization should work, and therefore this tool will situate itself beautifully and how the procurement organization should be conducting its work. If you haven't talked with the head of procurement about that and you don't have executive sign up, guess how much usage your tool is going to get, right? So I think it's a great point that oftentimes driving efficiency and driving that change it requires pulling in leadership in different parts of the org to highlight, hey, there's a lot of inefficiency that we've identified in this process. I'm an internal PM. My job is to help make better tools here, and I think that we need to go and explore reworking this process. Is that on your radar? Do you agree with my observations? Or maybe I'm seeing things wrong, right? And oh, by the way, I've done my homework. This always helps when presenting to executive. Here's what I think the problem is. Here's why I think it's a problem. Here are a couple solutions that I've mapped out. And by the way, here's the solution that I think would work best of the ones I just presented to you. Right? So this is like it's sometimes called the briefcase approach, right? So you show up with the problem, you show up with, here's folders A, B, and C for possible answers. I can walk you through them if you're interested. You're probably busy and don't have time to go through all the details. I think you should do option B. Here's what I want from you. But if you want to know more, I can go walk you through the pros and cons and like everything I considered and like why I think option B. But look, you're a busy gal. Your job is to go and be a VP of this enormous org, so you probably don't have time to go and look at the details. Should we just go ahead and do B? That kind of approach can work really well because it gives them it acknowledges, not my decision. You're the boss lady. You get to make the decision for your org. I've done my homework. I think it's B. Here's why. And if they are indeed as busy as you think they are, and they trust you to make the right call, that you've built up that trust relationship by previously building great tools that their users love, they'll increasingly just rubber stamp and say like, sure, sounds good. Yeah, my team loves your work. Go ahead, ship option B, right? And then you can then go with that vested authority, like I ran it by the VP and this is what she said. We're going with option B. If you don't like it, go talk to the VP. It's not my call. Big boss lady made the call, right? And then you can sort of go then with that delegated authority to go drive a larger change, right? And this is it's an important part of the practice of PMing. Isn't just working with designers and software engineers and testers to turn out great product. It's ensuring great impact. And that impact goes beyond just the product. And especially as you go up in your career, a junior PM is expected to be given some functional part of a product and then make sure it's well polished and work with a small team of engineers and maybe a designer to make that great. A really senior PM is tasked with figuring out questions that the organization hasn't even figured out were a problem, identifying solutions and driving solutions independent of the degree to which that involves crafting products or whatever. Just like I throw you into the mix, you figure out how to make the organization better, and then the organization's better, and you can prove that like you made the organization better. And that's what seniority ends up looking like, is being given a more and more poorly formulated task and less direct authority to actually make it better. But you're just persuasive enough and able to put enough dots together and pull ideas and problems and solutions from the right space and get them in front of the right people in the right way that the right stuff gets done. And that's sort of the magic that ends up getting worked at the more senior level. So I think what you're describing is that as you go up the internal tools PMing ladder, life looks more and more like that, where you could go into an organization, find problems, source those problems, source solutions, and present solutions that could include things going wildly out of scope. Now, that's not to say if you want to become senior, you should go start trying to book meetings with the CEO to tell them how to do their job better, right? That it's a matter of earning trust, especially early in a job, it's really important for any PM, but especially for an internal PM to get some quick wins. So when I joined my team at Facebook, the generalist PM to come join the internal tools team, there was a bunch of like really talented, mildly jaded engineers who were there running, with their tools. And that first night, that Monday night, the first week I joined the team, I performed a major code commit that added a new body of important corpora to the search results, right? So SEVs are emergencies at Facebook, and people were looking for SEV details in the internal search tool, but the internal search tool wasn't scraping the SEV database. And so I built the module that added the SEV corpus to the search database. So Tuesday morning, folks came in, second day on the job, and my code commit was running. The engineers looked at each other like, I like this guy. we're going to get along just great, right? Because he's not just going to sort of present PowerPoint spreadsheets at us, but he's going to be rolling up his sleeves, getting into the trenches with us, understanding the technical systems, understanding what users need, and delivering a solution. And that helped build a trust bridge with the engineering team quickly. So I think building those trust bridges with your counterparts, not especially with the engineering team, but also with your executive counterparts in other parts of the org, starting by doing a listening tour, understanding their problems, reflecting them back to them. Really good idea. I don't know, how many of you can raise your hand, how many of you have read like First 90 Days? Not seeing a whole lot of raised hands. Great book. It describes how to start a senior job really efficiently. And the TLDR, although I do recommend reading it, is that day one, especially if you're senior, people will start asking you, so what do you think we should do? What's the plan, boss? You got hired in here because you have all the answers, right? So what should we do? If you just say, I don't know, then people will learn, okay, he's an idiot. We made a bad hire. If you come out with confident answers, they're almost assuredly going to be wrong on day one. You don't have enough data, right? So what do? Crap, you're in this position where people need you to have firm answers. You don't have firm answers yet. And the answer is that you have a plan to have a plan, right? Very important. So what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to be presenting you with really solid options in 90 days. The first 30 days, I'm mostly going to listen. I'm going to have my own biases. I'm going to have my own prejudices. I'm going to have my own ideas of where I think the company is likely at and what needs to be done. I'm going to set those aside. Open brain, right? You tell me, what does this company do? What's frustrating? What's working well? What's not working well? I'm going to go talk to everyone. I'm going to talk to folks who are just hired in. I'm going to talk to grizzled veterans who hate the company but still work here because the benefits are good. I'm going to go talk to senior leadership. And then once those 30 days are over, I'm going to start reflecting my findings, right? This is not my opinion. This is not what I think the plan is. Remember, the plan comes in 90 days. Don't ask me for the plan yet. I'll give you a great plan. But right now, I'm just going to start reflecting back to, here's what I'm hearing. Here's themes of what I'm finding in the team. And it turns out that alone is actually super valuable. By the way, this is almost all consultants do, is they go and actually have those conversations with people, and then they reflect those conversations back to the team. Very, very valuable exercise. And so you're already providing value then just by encapsulating, here are the activities of the team, here's how people are feeling about things, and then pushing that back. So that starts to build credibility, in part because you're saying back to people the things that they told you. And there's nothing people like better than having somebody else reflect their opinion back at them. That's a brilliant idea. Somebody really smart must have told you that, right? And so now you've built this trust and rapport with people. You actually listened to me. We had a conversation. We talked. You took notes. You understood me. Like, I like this guy, right? And so whatever you say next, I'm probably going to like, because, I feel understood by you. And so even if it ends up something that's different than what I proposed as a longstanding veteran, I'm going to trust your decision because you did a good job reflecting my inputs, and you did a good job at collecting inputs from other people on the team. And that sort of sets you up then for that third segment of like 60 to 90 days. You start teasing out like, hey, based on these themes and based on the feedback I got from presenting these themes, these are directions that seem to be high priority. And these are the beginnings of ideas that I'm seeing for that. You start collecting some feedback on that. And so by the time you get to like 90 days in, You've got a strong and credible plan. It's based on real inputs from people all over the org. People have had a chance to weigh in on it. And now you can say, okay, this is what we're going to do for the next 2 years, guys. Let's go, right? And everyone's going to rally behind you because like, I was heard, my input was part of this. The problems that I offered are part of this. The solutions that I offered were part of this. This guy seems credible. He's good at listening to people. He's good at formulating something that is credible to go and take action on. It's prioritized appropriately. Sounds like a good plan. Let's go to work, right? And so that's just, it's a great way to get to a place of having impact anytime you get parachuted into a new situation. So that was my summary.
That's awesome. It looks like we have a question from Tim.
Hey, David. I'm Tim. I'm actually a product manager at Walmart. I work with Allie. By the way, love the enthusiasm. This is a really great conversation. You mentioned earlier that when launching an internal product, it's important for it to be 10x better than what the original product that the users were using. And one of the things that I've encountered is, and the reality of the situation is, you don't always have the ability to make a product 10x better. We have a finite amount of resources. We have an X amount of time from leadership. And also the user base, at least with what we work, a lot of the time, they're a little bit resistant to the change of a new tool. They want to kind of stay in the past with what they're currently using. How have you kind of rode that fine line of trying to get a product out to meet that MVP expectation, but also deliver enough value so you kind of get that user adoption that you're trying to get from those users?
Great question. Some of it depends on the particular circumstances of whether a singular point in time switchover is going to be required. There's some kinds of tools where you can't have part of the team using system A and part of the team using system B. So if there's going to be a switch over to system B, it's all or nothing. You can't just kind of do part of it. And those are probably the hardest. Because I can guarantee you, no matter how hard you work, there are going to be some people who are going to be really pissed off about it. Some people may quit, right? And so I think that's different than automatically discounting negative feedback on a plan to switch over from system A to system B. Like, that's the wrong call on this. But at the same time, acknowledging that humans are generally resistant to change. Right. And if there's a way that I'm doing my job that's working okay for me, I've built in the ways in which it's not working okay, humans build scar tissue. They build calluses, right? So yeah, does it hurt to do it this way? Yeah, but I'm just kind of used to it. You get to a point where like you don't even see the hard parts in your own work. And that's actually one of the bits of value that an internal PM brings, is observing the work, not just asking people, what do you see are the problems? Let me go and tackle those for you, but actually observing their day and like, okay, you didn't report this as a problem, but this is literally taking 2 hours a day that you didn't need to take. And that hurts me and my soul just watching you spend all that time with this thing that you don't need to be doing. And that's a huge part of it, by the way, is having fresh eyes into the problem. But then convincing people of that switchover is one of the classic hard parts, right? So how many of you guys have read Crossing the Chasm? Okay, a handful of hands. Yeah, all right. For those of you who haven't, I think the short of it is that humans fall along a spectrum of how much appetite they have for risk and trying out new things. And there's a small set of the population who are the early adopters, and they identify as loving to try out the new shit, right? And that's just kind of who they are. And then there's sort of the early majority, and these are people who like to be hip with things. They don't try the crazy early stuff, but like if it looks like something's working, they're happy to take it. And then there's the sort of late majority, and then there's like the late adopters who'll be dragged kicking and screaming into like any kind of a change because they have a process that works for them. So I think this sort of mentality of like, you'll expect to find a distribution like that in any reasonably sized human population. And unless you're very specifically selecting for some sort of subset of attributes, and you'll notice different parts of your org will be disproportionately represented across that overall curve. But then you should expect a distribution. It's not going to be a perfect Gaussian, right? But it's going to be some sort of a distribution there. And the early adopters are going to provide you a little bit of a head fake because they're going to love it. Oh my God, somebody built something new. Let me try it out. This is so cool. Thank you for building something new, right? And the wrong head fake from that is like, oh, everyone's automatically going to love this when we roll this out to the whole org. But if those were self-selected people in the early adopter audience, surprise, surprise, when you go to do a larger scale rollout, enthusiasm is much more muted. So the book Crossing the Chasm is about how do you get from this enthusiastic group of early adopters who just love trying out new stuff to that early majority, and then just, you know, peer pressure ends up bringing everyone else along eventually, right? And the short answer is it's a challenge. There's a reason why, you know, you needed to write a book about it, and it's a whole thing about like chasm theory, and I don't think you need to go down that rabbit hole. But I think the TLDR is that it's kind of hard, but part of the way that you do it is that you showcase some of the benefits. So if it's possible to do a pilot, you let early folks do a pilot. And then you can showcase the results. Like these people were able to spend 30 minutes less a day wrangling with their logistics system, right? And here's some pull quotes, but honestly, I don't need to put those in a big, beautiful billboard, because if you want, like, that was Fred, that was Janice. Go talk to Fred and Janice. Like, they literally sit next to you, and they'll tell you about what worked with the tool and what didn't. And you can you build momentum there that produces sort of this critical mass of evidence, both for the individual workers as well as for the management chain, because the management chain also knows that introducing change is going to result in resistance and frustration within their ranks, right? And so they're keen allies here. And that's a little bit different than in, say, a customer-facing product where there's not the extra dynamic of management, right? There's just like, do your users like the change or do they not like the change? And some of them are going to like the change and some of them are going to hate the change. And that's sort of it. It's sort of a little bit more multidimensional with an internal tool. You have to bring management along, right? And so I think one thing that's really helpful is to slightly over communicate and to have the managers of the teams that are going to be affected by this new tool introduction, invite them or their delegates in as optionals for like your weekly reviews of like, you know, or if you do Scrum, like your customer meetings every other week, like, you're my customer. Like, so I want to show you, here's how we're currently thinking about things. I want to give you a demo. This is just a tech demo. Like, I'm not asking you to use this. It might still crash or whatever, but like, I'm going to walk you through what we're building, how we're building it, why we're building it. What do you think? I want your feedback. Like, are we focused on the right things? What are the main things that your team is going to have questions about? And if you bring them along with you for that process, then your management team can be keen allies for actually rolling it out. Because if they're good managers, they'll be keeping their team in the loop. Like, hey guys, so the new procurement system, I just got a demo last Tuesday. It's looking pretty slick. It's going to be about 4 weeks until they're ready to start rolling it out. Here's some screenshots I'm going to share with you, right? Not asking you guys to switch over this today. I know it's going to be a big shift, but I just want to prep you for what's coming down the pipe, right? And so figuring out how to recruit them in that way so that when it does get rolled out, it's not a surprise. They've known it's coming. They've had a chance to have feedback. They've had they've had their inputs on it. They may not love every aspect of it. There may be bugs, right? But it's not a just drop a bomb on them, right? Welcome, it's Tuesday, and it's different than Monday because you've got a new way of working because I completely changed your tool and structure. Like, isn't change exciting, right? Like, no, like they're going to throw you out of the building, right? They're going to grab pitchforks. So
that's great stuff.
Yeah, bring them along with you.
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes left, and we've just got a few raised hands, so let's try and get through them. Laura.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you so much for your talk. This has been really super interesting. So I have a question on internal audiences. So as an internal PM, we talked about how, you know, the benefit is you have direct access to your customers, you're your own customer in some way. There's a nuance there in terms of having multiple internal audiences. For example, at Shopify, we've got our leadership, which we call our monitors of content in the internal tools. We've got our contributors, so people that are contributing in the tooling, and then our consumers. And then there's a segment that we actually don't optimize our tools for or build new features for. So there's instances where we might roll out a new feature that serves the needs of one audience and actually could cause friction to another audience. So I'm really curious if you have any thoughts on like balancing the needs of multiple internal audiences, or any examples from your work at Facebook. I'm sure there's leadership needs that like superseded the needs of, you know, the average Facebooker. But yeah, really interested if you have any examples or guidance to share there.
So that's a good point. If I can try restating the question, that when you make a tool that has many different flavors of users across an organization, changes made particularly with one group in mind may end up somewhat detrimental to a different group. And how do you communicate that? How do you message that? And I think the short, I'm going to start with, if that sounds like a tricky problem, it's because it's a tricky problem. So don't feel bad that it feels hard. This is part of the hard part. So there may not be really crisp, like, oh, just do X and everything will be fine. That you're going to have friction for changes. There's going to be people, including in senior leadership, where they may not be very happy with the decisions that you've made. So I think the important parts here are to attempt to, in advance of a big change, identify the likely impacted stakeholders, right? So can you do a good job mentally modeling who's going to like the change, who isn't going to like the change, why are they going to like it, why aren't they going to like it, right? And if you are newer in an organization, or maybe the management is newer, that you don't have a clear read on that, figure out how to get a clear read on that, right? Figure out how to build bridges with that leadership to get a better idea of what matters to them, how they make a decision. So it's sort of point one. It's like identify the stakeholders who are likely to be impacted. The second is develop a rationale for the change, right? So we've got this org that's critical to our operations, is 300 people. We think that with this rollout, we're going to save those people on the average 20 minutes a day. There's this small group over here. They're important to us. It's 15 people. We're going to create an extra 10 minutes of burden a day for them. That's going to piss them off. We know it. So net, this is still probably a good idea, but we want to be careful here. Then the next aspect is find those people who are disadvantaged by the change, reach out to leadership and give them an early warning, and brainstorm with them like, okay, so here's how we're currently thinking about rolling out the change. Now, let me just stop you right there. You're probably going to be unhappy about this, and here's why we think that your team may be negatively impacted. And that's why I wanted to have this meeting now, while we're early in crafting this, to get your input on, like, are we just thinking about this the wrong way? And there are kind of win-win optimizations that we can make here and changes to our plan that both accommodate the primary need of the reason why we're rolling out this change, and also don't completely screw over your team. Because we'd really rather not. That's why I proactively reached out to have this meeting with you, right? And it could be that they are able to identify new solutions, ways of looking at the problem that you hadn't identified, that allow for, even if it doesn't magically solve all of the negative impact, minimizes or mitigates the impairment, right? Worst case, messaging. So just making sure to brace the team for it. Because it turns out that humans are very adaptable creatures, right? Both and I mentioned this before, but in both positive and negative ways. People hate surprises. That's like the worst thing, is to give somebody a negative surprise. But people can bear even really terrible news if it's given with enough warning that, by the way, I need you to sit down. I've got some really bad news for you. This really shitty thing is going to happen to you in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And just having that empathy, giving them the heads up, they can, be frustrated about it, but then there's not a big reaction when the rollout ends up actually happening, because they've been prepared for it. You didn't just drop a bomb on them, right? So in some cases, that's obviously worst case. I'm not saying optimize for hey, as an internal PM, your primary skill is going to be learning how to deliver bad news to people really well. But it may end up being one of the things that you need for teams that are negatively impaired. And then, by the way, just from a karma bank perspective, think about how in the next point release, you can throw in a little feature just for that team, right? Just thinking of you, right? I really wasn't trying to screw you guys over. I went and I put in this optimization. I put in this side panel. I put in this extra report that's mainly just for your team. Because I acknowledge that it had this negative impact to your team, that we made this bigger change, right? So just things like that, because it's a relationship that's ongoing with all of these different stakeholders. And they're adults. They know that they're not always going to get their way, but just they want their team to be respected. At the end of the day, when I've seen management get really angry, it's because they feel like their team and their team's role has been systematically disrespected. Like nobody listens to us. Nobody keeps us in the loop about what's going on. We just get all sorts of random crap handed to us at the last minute. It destroys our productivity. Like, I hate this job, right? Like those are the sort of narratives that you hear from folks that are management that gets very grumpy, but management that's kept in the loop, that feels respected, that is notified early about changes that could impact their team. They may be frustrated about an individual change, but if they feel like they're part of the process, they'll generally be a team player. Hope that answered the question. Okay, we had another hand that was raised earlier. Forrest, yes.
Yeah. Thanks, David. It's been great. My question is about measuring outcomes where there aren't good metrics when you start out. A lot of time, I think I've seen this around time. Like teams don't measure how long things take them, but we want to prove that we saved them a material amount of time. So how have you kind of handled those situations where your current metrics are a little lacking?
Yeah, so it's also one of these things where if you come from doing, say, consumer at Facebook, you could do a 0.1% rollout and get highly statistically relevant results on the impact of a new feature within seconds in some cases, right? Because you got like 2 billion people a day are using your product. Your N is really large, right? So you know the impact of your work. Versus like if you roll out a new change that impacts the day-to-day work schedules of 15 full-time employees, it's like, was it a good change? Was it a bad change? If you do your statistics, you say you're probably not ever going to really know. And so the same advice that I would give somebody who is at an early stage startup where your N is also small, it's disproportionately subjective feedback that you're going to be gathering. And so just acknowledging it, you should gather metrics. Right. And you should figure out how you can do a better job gathering metrics. If you're not currently instrumented to gather the metrics that you need, I think part of the exploration is how do you expand your telemetry? Beyond just like what does your tool do? If you don't have enough data to know if your tool is working, you should consider like what are things that you can do to improve your telemetry so that you can have the data that you need to know if your tool is working or not, just as a data point. But I do think that the role of subjective data gathering plays a really important role for any product with small n. As the n grows, you're able to better rely on statistical techniques for certainty. But I think that that's the really short answer there is like gather telemetry to be able to make better numerical decisions, pull in the stakeholders whose job it is to report on things like how effective is your team. Turns out the team's manager should be able to answer that, right? Because if the team's manager wants to get a good review on their perf, that they should be able to highlight, did your team get a lot done? And then if you can align your metrics with their metrics, then things get really exciting there because you're helping them do their job. They'll be a big advocate for you. But then, yeah, I think the role of subjective feedback is really important. And the fact that if it is a small team, you should be able to go and hop on a phone call, do a one-on-one, like 15-minute debrief with literally everybody who's using your tool. And you don't have a good reason for why you didn't do that because there are only so many people using your tool. But just acknowledging that mix of subjective and objective will be there at every scale. Even at Facebook scale, there's a degree of subjective feedback that's really critical for understanding a product's impact, but that you're disproportionately subjective in the early days and with small n. And that's okay. Not everything is dashboardable. And Merab.
Hey, hi, David. Thank you for such a great motivational talk. Yeah, and good to see you again. That's so my question is more related to that enterprise thing you were mentioning about where there is an external vendor tool. That's why they suck. Now, if you have a tool with an external solution, and there is somebody is pushing an external solution, and your internal tool you are trying to put in because of all the different things that are in there. And sometimes, and I've run into one of the situation where actually two teams are competing for two different internal tools, solution coming from different places. How do you navigate that? And finally, is there branding plays a good role here, or is there a good role for branding in an internal tool?
All right, so two different questions. The audio was a little garbled for me, at least just for the first part of that question. So let me try reading it back and make sure I got the question right. Is that you may be facing a situation where somebody has found an outside solution and they're looking to pull it in to replace an internal tool, and what to do about that? Was that the first question? The second question was the role of branding?
Yeah. So that was the first question. And first question was two parts, like either an external tool or within like competing tools within like different teams. So I was an example I can give. I was an industrial environment. So industrial IT team is pushing a tool, and IT team is pushing a tool. And between those, it's actually an integration tool, and both are coming from different places. Right?
So there's two different competing internal tools.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also in the same way, similarly, an external tool came into play. Similar dynamics, but in one case it was external tool, and one case it was an internal tool.
So we've got two internal tools competing against each other, an internal tool competing with an external vendor tool, and then what do we do about branding?
Okay. That's correct. Sorry for a long question.
No, that's cool. All right. So branding is probably the easiest one, because I think, once again, I come to my earlier point that the bar that's expected is very low. So the degree that you put any degree of thought into branding, people get super pumped about it. So a great example of this, I don't have it right here. Or do I? So at the data center, I do. Yes. Okay. So at the data center software team at Google, nobody had ever really built a logo for them. They had this sort of like, crappy, just text only logo. And so one of the first things I did on the team, even though it was trivial, did not have meaningful impact to any of our product's users, is I put together a logo for the team, for the data center software team. So you can see the DCSW and the Google colors here, right? And then this is a DCSW challenge coin. Here's the fun bit. I didn't make this coin. I didn't even have the idea that there would be a DCSW challenge coin. But once there was the logo and was professionally designed, it cost $15 on Fiverr. And I just paid that out of pocket, by the way. That once there was like this professional logo of this is our identity, we're the DCSW team. We put up the poster big around the DCSW area. People started like making DCSW swag. I've got a great DCSW hoodie. People came up with the idea of creating a DCSW challenge coin and created that and started handing it out. And there was a lot of enthusiasm for like, yeah, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. Fuck yeah, we make software that runs like the world's largest computing system and we're great at it. Like, and that's kind of awesome, right? And to have the team be excited about what they were doing, who they were building it for, and the scope of that, as emphasized by actually having some professional branding around that. Professional, again, meaning spending like $15 on it, was actually tremendously motivating, and then lifts the ability of the team to go and deliver, right? That's not the same thing as like, go spend $50,000 on a brand identity organization and do a 3-month process that comes up with a new name for your internal team. Like, no, God, no, don't like take that out of this talk. But like spending literally 30 minutes thinking about branding will cause you to wildly leap over the bar of what people are expecting, and that'll cause a lot of enthusiasm and surprise and delight, right? So that's answering question number 3. Questions number 1 and 2, which are kind of closely related, is like, what happens when there's competition? When there's an existing internal tool and there's maybe another internal tool that got created that has overlapping functionality, or when there's a third-party vendor tool that's being offered as an option. So I think the first thing to do is don't be defensive. Don't defend the tool that you built, that your team built at any cost, right? Your job is to be an adult and to make an arm's length, cool and professional decision. What's best for the company, right? What's best for, and that's not motivational, because like, who wants to like rah-rah for a corporation? But rather the empathy is with the users, the people who are going to use this tool. They're human beings. I care about them. What's going to help them do their job the best, right? And what's the opportunity cost that's being borne? So anytime that you are building and maintaining a tool that has real opportunity cost, because that engineering, product, and design team could be spent doing something else, right? And so if you're producing something that's only as good as what a third party could go and do, most companies have more money than smart people who can build things, right? And so your druthers should be, as an executive at a company, to err on the side of spending money versus spending smart people building time, right? Because the smart people building time is so precious to the core mission of the thing that you're doing, right? And it can be so incredibly highly leveraged. So really, you should take an objective view, take a step back. Anytime somebody's raised something as competition, say like, okay, let's be adults here. What does the team need? What's the functionality that's needed? What's offered by what solution, right? No solution is going to be perfect and be a silver bullet. So what are the components of what matters? What are the degree of deficiency of the various solutions? How much does that matter for this core base? And then if you don't have all the data, how do I get that extra data? How do I get extra signal about the degree of deficiency of a given possible solution? In some cases, if it's an important enough decision, and if it's not obvious from making a kind of a layout like that, then you may need to do a pilot, right? And I think you will get credibility from your executive leadership if it's seen that you're willing to kill your babies, right? That you lovingly crafted something 4 years ago, you rolled it out 2 years ago, it's been tremendously successful, but it turns out there's 3 amazing vendors out there in the industry who are doing it better now, and our engineering time is having to spend meaningful time to continue updating what we have, and we're on a lower trajectory than outside industry. Because like there's a bunch of these guys that get $100 million Series Bs to go and like execute on this really well. We've got a team of 3 really smart folks that's building it, but like they're going to lap us. And I want our employees to have the best possible tool. We made the right call 4 years ago. I'm proud of what we rolled out 2 years ago. We've had a huge positive impact, and it's time for us to put this down and pull in the commercial solution. We've done the pilot. Employees love it. And that is going to free up our headcount to go work on this other new thing here. Because again, this decision's not made in the vacuum. It's made against the opportunity cost. And if you make that concrete by the decision to kill the internal tool, this particular internal tool, freeing that time up to go and build this other thing here, that helps not just demotivate the team. Oh, by the way, this thing that you've been spending your day on like for the last 4 years, we're going to kill it. We'll think about whether or not you have a job next week. We'll see. Right? That'd be a really crappy meeting, but like, hey, this thing that you put together that people really loved, it did such a good job that we had a hard time figuring out if we were going to continue with that or pull in this tool that's made by a team like 40 times our size, right? Because that's what a kick-ass job you did building this thing. I think it's starting to look like, again, no surprises. It's starting to look like surprise, the team with 40 times more engineers may have built something that works better for our employees. So I wanted to talk with you about options in terms of different places we could deploy you. Here's what I have on my plate. I think, there's project A, B, C, D. I'd love to hear your ideas. Like, is this a good and complete list? Am I thinking about prioritizing this stuff correctly? Really, again, involving the employee in it early. Signaling to them early about what's happening, minimizing surprises, and getting their buy-in on a path forward that's exciting. Like, oh, phew, I was getting tired of working on this system for 4 years, honestly. Like, and it's really exciting and motivating to me to work on something that's new and high impact. And it's not just trying to half-facedly copy what industry has already gone out and built, right? Like, can actually be really motivating if you frame it the right way, and if, again, you pull people in early and bring them along with you in the journey.
Thank you for that. That's a good perspective.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I think we are a little bit over time, so thanks for everybody who's been able to stay a little bit extra with us. But I'm sure that we would all agree that, like everyone said, David's enthusiasm and great insight and frameworks and answers have definitely been worth the time. So thank you to everyone. I think somebody did ask if we are planning to send out the recording, and yes, that is our goal. We might even see if we can get it transcribed as well, so people kind of have a written version of this too. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Ryan.
No, that's great. Thanks so much. We're thinking about building a Slack community, so we'll send some details over if you're interested in discussing internal tools more. Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Cool.
David.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
So much
Cheers.
for your time.
And thank you for the great questions, by the way. It's really wonderful.
Cheers, man.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.